nuclear is very important. It's time to act. For our leaders, our regulatory processes and timelines need to match the requirement. We're trying to
Yeah.
save the world. We're channeling our entire lives, our families, to try to do this for us, for our people, and our future, our children. The regulatory processes and timelines in Canada, the United States, Europe, anywhere, they need to reflect the urgency of putting steel in the ground to get this done.
Just because the facts are A, if the narrative is B and everyone believes the narrative, then B is what matters. But it's our job in our industry to speak up proudly, soberly, and to engage people in this dialogue. Those 2.5 billion people that are in energy poverty, they need us.
America cannot meet this threat alone.
If there is a single country,
of course, the world cannot meet it without America.
that is willing to
We're going to need you, the next generation, to finish the
overhaul
job.
nuclear regulation
We need scientists to design new
and
fuels.
focus on net public
We need
benefit
engineers to invent new technologies. We
over absurd levels of radiation
need
protection,
entrepreneurs to sell those
then
technologies.
we will march towards this.
We need workers to operate assembly lines that hum with high-tech, zero-carbon
We have
components.
unlimited prosperity for all humans.
We need diplomats and businessmen and women and Peace Corps volunteers to help developing nations skip past the dirty phase of development and transition to sustainable sources of energy. In other words, we need you.
Okay, welcome to another episode of the Fire Division podcast. My name is Mark Heineman. I'm joined today by an awesome guest. He is luckily the second guest that we have here from Moltex Energy. It's the Chief Operating Officer, Michael England. Michael, how you doing today?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I was very excited to chat with you. And we chatted with your CEO previously, and folks can listen to that on another episode. So we'll try and cover a few different things, but excited to get color from you and hear about Moltex and how things are going. But before we dive into kind of Moltex and your role there, why don't we start with you? Where'd you get your start? Where'd you go to school? Tell us about your background.
For sure. So I am relatively new to nuclear, but not so much the infrastructure or the electricity sector. I was born in Calgary, I was raised in Toronto, and now I live in New Brunswick. So I'm going across the country. I'm not sure where, I've kind of run out of geography here, but university in Toronto region, University of Toronto, did an undergrad in political science, studied economics there. I have really weird, interesting, transitioning as an undergrad where I went through, sciences, trying to figure out what I want to be in life, economics, and then decided to be a lawyer and then changed my mind the last minute. You know, when you're in your fourth year and you actually meet professors that really actually truly care about you, they counseled me and they sort of said, "Hey, what do you really want to be?" And I said, "Well, I want to do something that changes the world when it comes to the environment." And so, being a young impressionable person, I jumped on the renewables bandwagon, so to speak. This is
Sure.
your typical, solar and wind and battery guy. And so I tried my best to make my way into government to change policy and around there. And so I did a master's of public policy and I think it's now global affairs as well, at the University of Toronto. And I broke into the Ministry of Finance and then used my Ministry of Finance connections to finally get into the Ministry of Energy. And while I was in the Ministry of Energy, I sort of held every position that you can. I started off in the economics department. I sort of worked myself out of a job, which is sort of my strategy, is to automate your job and get yourself ready for the next one. And made my way from the economics department all the way up to the top of the ministry and then back down to take over the division as the director of energy supply for Ontario. While I was there, the deputy minister, who I call him my work dad, Surgeon Bronio, very, very influential person in my life, put me in charge of a very important file, which was the renegotiation of the Bruce Power refurbishment agreement here in Ontario. Bruce obviously is one of the larger nuclear facilities that operates in the world, 6,300 megawatts, always on, always running, very reliable source, very good community member, and renegotiated that contract to refurbish the balance of the units that didn't get done in the first go. So did that for a couple of years. Represented Ontario, or certainly the Ministry of Energy, and worked with the ISO to get that done. Also managed the negotiation of the Ontario Power Generation lease with OPG and Bruce Power. Sort of a controversial thing in Ontario, as you can imagine, leasing those assets to Bruce Power for OPG, and
Now,
got that
why
done.
is that? I guess, so can we double click
Sure.
on that a little bit?
Yeah,
You know,
there's some history there.
yeah, I guess I feel ignorant about it. So Michael, let's zoom in on that a little bit. What was the experience at OPG, and why you mentioned leasing assets, and that was kind of new. I'm unfamiliar with I guess being in the States, you know, and kind of how that dynamic works.
Sure. So in Ontario, there are several large stations. They're really giant relative to the companion facilities around the world, the sites themselves. And the Bruce site is the largest in Ontario, with 8 running units, 6,300 megawatts, and the site itself is enormous, and it has a waste facility on it, and it's leased from the
Gotcha.
province, and the owner is Ontario Power Generation, to a private operator who's doing a fantastic job operating and rebuilding those units, Bruce Power. And my experience was with Bruce, beyond being up at the site and just really loving the stations quite a lot, and Bruce Power, um, was negotiating, or being part of the negotiation on behalf of the province, to release the site to facilitate the rebuild of the reactors in the extended life, because they're going way out into the future, right? So that needed to be released,
Gotcha.
released, yes, and it was an interesting experience because lots of high stakes there. The private operator needed to get their contract done in order to start their refurbishments to secure their future, as well as the region in Ontario's future around cheap power, cheap, safe power. And of course, OPG needed to make sure that their interests were protected as the owner of the facilities of the site, and that was a very, very interesting experience for sure.
Yeah. So let's take a step back. The Ontario Public Service. I mean, I feel like you went through this piece very quickly. You know, it was early career for you, but I'd just like to highlight that. I mean, it's pretty impressive, especially coming with kind of your background before getting in. And how do you think your skill set or your approach to work influenced that?
Um, I think the thing for me is finding a spot that actually you have passion for. And I feel like I think this is the same for yourself. It's definitely the same for most people that I've come across. Is if you actually like what you're doing and you find purpose in that, then you drive that through your work experiences, and you chase you chase it harder. There's one other piece though, is that I was taught when I was doing my first master's, is that one of my professors, Brad Graham, who did the growth strategy for Ontario, so trying to curb urban sprawl, he sort of said to me, he said, chase interesting things, but also work with interesting and supportive people. And that's exactly what I was young and under his wing, and that's exactly what I did when I was at the public service. Is I chose my division, I chose the leaders that I wanted to mirror, and I chased them, and I chased the work. And I started off in the economics department there as just a contractor. And that's pretty much how the government hires these days. It's make or break, sink or swim. And having a general and maybe even a refined understanding of economics, I was able to help the ministry with its mandate. I was also able to, as I sort of described or alluded to, I was also able to automate my role. So I kind of
Yeah.
eliminated myself, and that was impressive to my managers. I have a computer programming background as well. Studied that in college before university, and despite the fact that I never really went into the industry because I just didn't find that to be my passion, like I described earlier. Energy always was. I used my skills to automate that job, and it was really impressive actually. I basically turned all of the briefing notes and the spreadsheets and things like that I needed to do into a computer program. It would just call from the internet the data that was required and publish the things that were necessarily on a daily basis, and then they had to figure out what to do with me after that, right? So that's
They're like, wait, we thought that's what you're supposed to be doing every hour. And you're
yeah.
like, well, it's still getting done. Can I
Yeah,
still
I
work
sort
here?
sort of outsourced myself to a wild spreadsheet, and from there I went into more senior roles. I held I guess the director of operations is what they call it now. You could call it a chief of staff or the deputy minister's executive assistant, which is a chief role. It's a fantastic experience where you're in command of the whole ministry. You're basically the hand of the king or queen. And in that case, you get very close to some senior folks in the industry. You're in ministers' briefings, basically all of them. You are that person in charge of the ministry on behalf of the king or the deputy minister, and you interface with the policy deciders, the ministries, minister's office, and the minister himself or herself. And I had several ministers and just the two deputies. But after sitting in that office, starting off as a policy advisor to the deputy on economics and supply, I took over the office and managed the ministry through a couple of crises, which I choose to forget and survived. And I guess really the last big thing that I did from the office was, beyond restructuring the ministry a few times, was the long-term energy plan for Ontario, and just making sure that all of the supply options that I had learned were very important to the toolbox were in the plan, including nuclear, gas to support the wind and solar, etc. So there was a lot that I did in the deputy's office, and that transitioned into harder work down the line, right? So that's what happens, right? So I got promoted. I was being headhunted by a few usual suspects that sort of chased the deputy minister's director of operations, and the deputy said, no, you're not doing that, you're staying with the ministry. And he put me in charge of the division that I came from, the electricity supply division. I was in charge while I was there. I was in charge of planning, again, long-term energy plan implementation, so getting the plan actually done. I was in charge of hydrocarbons. So in Ontario, obviously, we don't produce quite a lot, but we move them, pipes, trains, etc. Did the
What
energy?
is the mix in Ontario for folks? I thought Ontario was very green and had a mostly emission-free energy mix, but notwithstanding transportation fuels.
Yeah, no, pound for pound, the electricity grid. I don't have it memorized anymore because it has transitioned, not a lot, but it is over half nuclear. It will be over half nuclear for the foreseeable future. That's your base load. There's also some rather large hydroelectric facilities in the Niagara region, way up north, and just spread throughout. Ontario Power Generation owns a lot of run-of-the-river facilities as well. So your base load is pretty much made up of those. Your peakers are your gas plants, as you would expect. They will probably run some base load here and there. I don't know if that actually occurred, but we had forecasted that to be the case certainly when Pickering came out. But while units were out for refurbishment, both Bruce and OPG are going at the same time. So you're having these giant 850 megawatt units coming off, which could power a city each, and you have to fill it. Then you've got your solars and your winds layered on top, and you've got some cogens here and there, but principally
Okay, I just pulled it up when you were chatting through it. I'll just list kind of the top. Well, there's only 6 that they list, but it's in 2021 it was 58% nuclear, 24% hydro, 8 or almost 9% gas and oil, 8.4% wind, 1% solar, and 1% biofuel.
I'm glad I got that right. This interview would have been over quickly, right? Yeah, the workhorse is definitely the nuclear facilities in Ontario and has been for a generation. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. No, so I love your background and kind of the approach of going to work hard and figure out how to do all the tasks that are assigned to me, but then also identify where you can improve them along the way. I think that's a great mindset, and like you said, automate. So how'd you transition then from, I guess, Ontario Public Service to PowerGen?
Yeah.
And I guess, are they different? What's the difference?
They're definitely different, and I can go
Yeah,
through that
yeah,
with you. It's very actually, I found it very fascinating. But the transition was very simple. I was being headhunted by the agencies. So the um the deputy minister's executive assistant, or whatever you want to actually call it, they call themselves several different things, as I mentioned earlier, is a pinnacle role in the industry, and you're highly sought after. Um, the deputy, as I mentioned, didn't let me go, and for good reasons. He had invested in me, and he needed me to help him with the renegotiation of the Bruce Power contract, to support the ministry's interests at the negotiation table, and that was a hard slog. Um, and so the transition had already sort of started, as you can imagine. When you're in the room with Bruce Power every day for 2.5 or whatever the amount of years it actually was, you become to really understand the economics of the facilities, the importance of the facilities, the interests at stake, how important they are to the communities, let alone the electricity system. You really do start that transition. I fell in love with nuclear in the process because of just the sheer scale of electricity generation coming off those facilities, at the price that they are relative to other sources, and how reliable and safe they are relative to other sources. And just that most, I won't say all because I think that's an exaggeration, but certainly most of the wastes are not externalized, they're captured in the price of the power. So for every
yeah,
electron that leaves the Bruce site, some cents are put in a bank account to make sure that the site can be first decommissioned, and second, the fuel and the waste streams can be addressed. And so the system's fully funded, so to speak. Now, so I mean, I fell in love with it. Also, the scale when you're in these stations. I don't know what it is about me and toys, but just going into Darlington, yeah, it was like the Starship
big
Enterprise.
buildings, big
Yeah,
plants. Yeah,
the turbine is the size of it's bigger than a school bus. So I mean, just and the Darlington station itself is, oh, it's such a beautiful facility. Going in there, falling in love with it. It's not like I didn't love Niagara. I walked through the tunnel.
sure.
I've seen the pump storage. I love the history. It built Ontario. Certainly is one of the more important assets in North America. But the nuclear stations are just the height of human engineering, and the sky's the limit for the SMRs that are coming down the pike. But again, the transition started there, and when the deal was complete, I left a little bit earlier. To join Ontario Power Generation. I made a decision to join Ontario Power Generation because it was going first. Its unit was coming down first, Unit 2. It was going to be the first unit refurbished in Ontario, and that's what I wanted to do. And
And that was in what, 2015?
yeah, in
Okay.
approximately that space, 2020 to 2015, and I joined Ontario Power OPG in their finance department, and I was sort of put on the side because you can't leave government. This is one of those transition pieces. You can't leave government after doing a multi-billion-dollar negotiation for Bruce Power and join a competitor, so to speak. I'd say competitor, to be honest with you, but sister companies, really.
Sure.
You join Ontario Power Generation, and you have to insulate Bruce Power and the province, and so they put me on the side for a year. And what I did in that year was I did an MBA. I did I did some things for the finance department at OPG, including manage putting together its corporate strategy, the company's corporate strategy, which was a giant undertaking across the entire company. Did some planning for the company, and then at the time the CEO Jeff Lyash, he called me into his office one day I remember it's very interesting to get a call from your CEO when you're so many levels down, and he said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to work at the refurbishment project at Darlington. That's why I joined Ontario Power Generation, and it really truly was because I wanted to transition from the commercial side, the negotiation piece, to actually being on the site and swinging hammers if I had to, mopping floors or whatever it was that OPG needed me to get that unit refurbished, because I'd seen the immense value and importance to our electricity system in our economy. And I just wanted to be part of that project. And he said, okay, pack your bags, be careful what you wish for. And he gave me one piece of very important advice that I've kept with me. And I hope that he can hear this because it really did stand out to me. He said, Michael, you don't have the experience for this. And when you go there, don't get high on a good day and don't get low on a bad day. They're going to come. Just be straight through. Just don't oscillate. Sure, celebrate a win, but recognize that a win on a schedule is pulling forward work you may not be ready for. And when he said that, I was like, interesting.
Yep.
And then I
Yep.
lived it. And once I joined there, we were ahead at our dewatering program, which pulled forward critical path work, which really was a problem. So, so his experience and his advice really hit me, maybe the first day. So it was a great experience.
I
And
empathize
that's the
strongly with that.
transition.
Meaning,
Yeah.
coming from operations, it's so true. There are days that you're like, okay, everything went right, no one according to schedule, and I can feel good about that. And this job's easy. And then there's days that it's just a total disaster, and you're like, we're gonna miss our targets, we're gonna miss our schedule, we're over budget. How is this happening?
That's
Right.
projects for you, right? That's how
Yeah.
they go.
Yeah.
And I think that's why he gave me that advice, because again, I didn't have the experience. I mean everybody's got ups and downs, right? But when you
Sure.
become so committed to something that it almost is who you are, you really need to step back and not go up and down with the day of the schedule, right? So,
Yeah.
and it was such an interesting experience at Unit 2. I that from the other things that I've done in my life, that was very interesting relative to the other jobs. It was right. I was in the vault.
Yeah.
I became trained. Like I was a nuclear professional. Um, there was no bones about it. I was in the fire. It was
Well,
fantastic.
coming in, especially somebody coming in with less experience, you can leverage that to your advantage, right? Remain humble and just ask questions then, and ask to learn about it, right?
Hmm.
It can be challenging sometimes when if you're put in a position that you're supposed to be a decision maker, and you don't have all the information, or feel like you can't get all the information. But um, yeah, I think there's often no better way to learn than do and go and see it.
Hmm. I agree with you. It was a fantastic
So
experience.
the
I learned a lot.
refurbishment was, I guess, while doing a little bit of research for this interview, I might have been confused. They were refurbishing the reactor, but what was the useful life? Was there consideration of shutting this down or shutting some of these down instead of refurbishing? Give us a little bit of background on that.
Sure. So this takes me back to the time in which I was at the ministry, right? So the system
Sure.
planning is what sort of dictates these decisions
Gotcha.
beyond, are they physically, technically capable to be refurbished? And so, Ontario Power Generation and Bruce Power submitted cost profiles for getting these things done. And what we did is we just compared those costs at the planning is very sophisticated for both these companies, and so they give you a range of what these costs could come in, and I think that you know exactly what I'm talking about. You can have
It's
various
between
costs.
zero and all the money. $0 and all the money you have. Yeah.
And government, you're taking all the risk for us, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, jokes aside, no, Bruce and OPG were very sophisticated planners. Surprisingly, to my own, eyeballs, OPG and Bruce Power came in very close. They exploited the most sophisticated ways to plan. In particular, I think OPG spent quite a lot of money getting ready for Unit 2, and it paid off. And more importantly, the investment that they made in Unit 2's planning and also just recording data as they walk through it has made their subsequent units massively de-risked. So, but yeah, back to your question. The province reviewed various options. remember what I said earlier, and I think that you can probably relate to this very well. Just the amount of baseload energy flying off those stations for the price and the
Yeah.
reliability, and just also something that is now becoming more and more important in our current context with the Ukraine-Russia situation. Security of supply. Now, obviously, Canada's not Europe on the east there with Russia, but there is
Right.
something to be said with having control and command of your own space, your own resources, and that's an important piece. 'Cause the alternatives to nuclear in Ontario are arguably importation of electricity from other jurisdictions, and that can work in a place like Canada and Ontario, as long as it does work. But obviously Ontario wanted to have control of its electricity supply.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so they made the
That makes
decision
sense.
to refurbish.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Okay, so you're in the trenches. You're watching this plant get refurbished. How long did it take, and then what was kind of the next step after that?
Oh,
And
several
what
years.
was your role during it?
Yeah, so I joined the project as a commercial guy, and strategy sort of been my way of being deployed in strategic roles that building plans, commercial negotiation, and I joined that way. And so we had these very complex relationships with our vendors, and there are several vendors working on a station of that size, including you know, one vendor that's working on the turbine, one vendor that's working on the balance of plant, one vendor that's working on the guts of the reactor. We called it the RFR project, RE2 project. Now, even within those vendors, there are sub vendors and subcontractors. And so what I did when I
Always.
first
Yeah.
started was I looked at the performance of our contracts and what do we need to do for the subsequent units to improve them. And I worked with a couple of colleagues there to get that done. And we brought in some alternative options should things not go well. Every company needs to think strategically, including large utilities. Obviously, they're in the midst of you mentioned a battleground or a war zone. It really was the fire, right? So, each day is millions of dollars unit out of service. That's the way utilities think. Get this thing back up. Don't let a day slip because it's a day that the people of Ontario are paying for the slippage. And so fighting for it, looking for ways to improve the contracts, and bringing in alternatives should we need to execute those. And then I moved into quality role. So this was a big step. They sent me to some training where I learned a little bit more about the industry and myself, and I was promoted to take on a larger portfolio. And yeah, so I took over a quality role looking at all of what we called station condition records and non-conformance reports or records. And this is a very important part of the nuclear industry, as it is all electricity, or just frankly, just generally any business. I mean, I can't
Sure.
think of a business that shouldn't record its events. But yeah, so we would record all of our events, and then what we would do is disposition those events, and the ones that really impacted our day, we would investigate and put some tools in place or put some changes in place to make sure that we didn't experience that again, and then record it for the next unit. And so that's what we did, and that's what I did. I chaired what was called the Corrective Action Review Board. It's a senior level board where we look at all of the non-conformance, all of the quality issues, disposition those with experts, and then move forward. We hit all of the four major pillars of a project: cost, safety, schedule, and quality. Primarily focusing on anything related to safety, as you can imagine. Quality was a big piece there. And so that's what I did. I also was in charge of a big project. So this is the beauty of working in a giant capital project, is that sometimes things pop up and they just need to find folks to do them and lead them. I
Yep.
paired with a gentleman named Boris Filanovich, who was the director of ops and maintenance for the project. Sort of a very senior role, certainly relative to mine. He's right in the field there with the trades. And what we were tasked with doing was finding $100 million in the current project spend, and finding it without damaging the organization. So we did that. Got my car keyed a couple times, and did the hard work to find that for the company, and then re-baseline the project. So those are the major things that I'm very proud of in Unit 2. Besides the fact that it came on time, on budget, without any sort of safety issues that are very important to not have. I think we're millions and millions of hours worked without a lost time. So very proud of
Gotcha.
that project.
Yeah, super cool. That's
Super cool.
it
Yeah, I agree.
sounds like a bunch of hard work, but
Yeah.
you're no stranger to that. So
I feel like a little piece of me is in Unit 2 somewhere. And so I'm
yeah,
very proud of Unit 2. Yes.
that's great. So then you transitioned to a decommissioning strategy role
Yes.
at
Yes.
OPG.
And I'm not particularly, you know, super excited about decommissioning itself, other than it's part of the life cycle and it needs to get done. And
Right.
it's actually really interesting when you get into it. I mean, these stations prioritize operations. As you can imagine, this is not an OPG only thing. It's a everywhere, everything thing. And so as you prioritize options, you build up a little bit of liability on the side for when these things close. And so
Yep.
the company, Ontario Power Generation, OPG, is pretty fantastic. So what they do is they've got enough foresight. I like to say that I helped a little bit, but they got enough foresight to understand that this is a giant facility, Pickering. It's coming up on its end of life as it was currently envisioned with the CNSC. Its safety case was coming up, and the company made a decision to close it, to mothball it, right? To put it in what we call safe state and safe storage for future decommissioning and a deferred basis several decades later, right? That's a very standard strategy.
Sure.
The company said, well, if it's not economic to refurbish it, let's figure out what we can do to exploit the site. What can we do to benefit Ontarians with this site? Could we decommission this site earlier? Could we build other facilities on it? What's it going to take? What's it look like? What are the risks? Tell us what this is going to cost. And that's what I did for a couple of years there.
Gotcha. Yeah. There was a big advocacy effort, wasn't there, to save Pickering and not have it be decommissioned?
Yes, yes,
What?
including me.
I participated.
I have to tell you, I have to be honest with you. Since I worked at the ministry, this is kind of how having a broad background helps you in your thinking anyway. Maybe not in your execution, but the thinking to me was, let's study the economics on this facility. We've just redone Darlington's units. We're doing Bruce's units. You cannot tell me that we can't figure out a more economic way to retube or rebuild some of Pickering and have this station running longer, and all of the benefits of doing so. As long as it's safe and economic, I think you should do it, particularly because the steel's already in the ground.
Yep.
It's transmission connected. That is such an unbelievably valuable asset to have a transmission connected site already built. Make
Yeah.
use of this thing. Right? If you want to put a different supply option there, okay, as long as it's economic and safe. But if the current facility can be extended safely and economically, that station has never performed as well as it is right now. Never. It is doing very well, and they should investigate. And they have actually just recently announced that they will investigate the economics of refurbishing it. I don't know when that will be announced, but I do know the person that's got the stressful job of doing that. So we'll see. But I feel like if there's an opportunity to keep that steel running, keep that transmission line live, they should exploit that as long as it's safe and economic.
Gotcha. So let's transition. Finally, I mean, it's a long and extensive background, but still in a relatively short amount of time. I mean, you've been in the industry for what, not just over 10 years, or since about 2011, right? So I guess
Yep.
that's 12 years. So transitioning to Moltex, what was that process? Did you seek them out? Were they looking for somebody that with your skill set?
Yeah, they had hunted me.
Okay.
They approached me. I didn't approach them. I was happy in OPG. You probably can
Yeah.
tell just by the way I talk about OPG and Bruce Power that I love them, and I
Yeah.
do. It's because of what they do and their purpose, right? I really do respect those institutions and the opportunities they gave me to grow as a person, but also just being part of those generational pieces. And so I wasn't looking. But I'll tell you something. So, not opportunity knocks. So
Yep.
the SMR file is unique. For the first time since I've been alive and actually just monitoring the sector, the ISO in Ontario released a report, said they need 18 gigs of new nuclear. There's a lot of supply options in there as well. Hydrogen. There's going to be obviously some gas, wind and solar. There's a whole spectrum of resources that are required for Ontario, which is the big market, right, outside of Quebec, because Quebec is hydro. That needs to get built in order to electrify the economy, to get off hydrocarbons in our fuel sources, right? It's a big deal. And the SMRs are going to be part of that. And doing system planning, I always knew that. I wasn't naive to it. I knew the policy and the politics would catch up. The reality is that we are in, as a species, not New Brunswick, not Ontario, not even Canada. Canada's kind of a rounding error in the world. We are in a fight right now to save our species. I mean, arguably, you may or may not agree with me, but I believe that climate change is very much on our doorstep if it's not already here. And we just got to get on with the balanced toolbox here. We just got to build these things, and we got to build them rapidly, because the oceans are off gassing, the polar ice caps are melting, and I've got kids, and I don't have time to wait for this. I got to make sure these kids can, buy apples at the grocery store in the future, right? We're getting real, is what I'm saying. And you
Sure.
have to sort of recognize at least something's going on here, and part of the solution in my mind is building our economies to address the situation, doing things smarter and better, and SMRs are that. And so Moltex contacted me, and I'm not gonna suggest that I immediately jumped on. I did my research.
Sure.
There are several SMR companies and vendors that you can jump into. The industry requires folks, from my experience, to cross the spectrum, particularly
Yep.
engineers and scientists and planners, and project managers. But hey, Moltex is trying to do something a little different than most of them. We're not just trying to build an SMR. We're trying to change the entire industry, which to me is very attractive, right? You go back to my history here, what I'm doing, I'm trying to rebuild Unit 2, right? Whether it's commercial or it's physically swinging steel, whatever, to basically anything, to get these things up and running. And then I'm at Pickering, fighting for the legacy of the industry, and potentially even just rebuilding Pickering for the future. And what are we going to do with that facility and that site and just the broader fleet? To now looking at what I'm doing, air quotes, you can't see me because the lag in the call, but uh,
Sure.
what I would argue is the Achilles heel of the industry, which is the waste piece, right? So remember earlier I mentioned that these things are fully funded. That is true. Segregated funds are put on the side, meant to decommission and to address the fuel. These funds are meant to grow, and then the fuel has a storage solution, right? But Moltex is trying to come at it in a different angle. It's trying to look at the fuel, the energy potential that remains in those pellets, can-do pellets,
Yep.
and exploit that. And we should do that as not just as a country, as a species. Why would we ever not spend whatever $1 million or XYZ to get that research done? Whether it's Moltex or some other competitor, this is a legacy issue. This is a very important way of securing our future, is to use what we have. Don't do any new mining. Use what we have, recycle what we have, and make use of that for clean supply in this fight that is timed. We don't have much time here. And
Yeah.
so when Moltex came and knocking, and they were referencing recycling of fuel, I jumped on. I mean, I jumped on emotionally. The passion is there. It was a very easy transition for me, just because of exactly what the vision is here. The vision is not just build another SMR. The vision is build an SMR that eats the fuel. I mean,
Yeah,
if
any
you're
of the
coming
spent fuel
from,
that's already been used in other reactors, right? We
you
covered a
bet.
little bit in our discussion with Rory, but quickly, you guys have the stable salt reactor waste burner and the waste to stable salt technology that you guys are developing, right?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah,
And
which is awesome.
they're very exciting. They're very exciting. It does it's not hard to talk folks into getting excited about the opportunities. You do have there are some risks here, obviously, right? I think they're fairly straightforward. You do have a proliferation risk or a policy risk around folks misunderstanding the technology. Very carefully, we have designed the designs to not produce concentrations of plutonium that could be used for any sort of weapons. You'd have to build an entirely new billion-dollar facility beside ours to do it. Our process does not lead to that, and it's very consciously
Which I
designed
think
that
that
way.
needs to be highlighted when in this discussion. That's been a huge part of the narrative for and justification for why we'll say North America, but other parts of the world don't recycle. It's because, well, people are afraid that if you're separating isotopes, you're going to be able to grab enough material and go and build a bomb with it. But we're scientists, engineers, and understand how to innovate on these processes so that that's difficult, if not impossible, to do. So I think what you guys are doing, and just what you said was, well, no, you'd have to build a whole nother facility to try and steal it and proliferate the material to be at weapons risk. And what we're doing is actually safer because we're taking it away and creating it into a fuel. So
Exactly.
I think it's the opposite, meaning it's one of the safer things to do to prevent proliferation.
Right. It's really we like to say that we're on the side of the angels. We're not trying to do anything that would lead to any bad outcomes in that sense. I think it's easy for the anti-nuclear community to jump on that one. I think it's sufficiently confusing when you start talking about actinides and higher level
Oh,
actinides and
no
concentrations of
one
chemistry.
understands it because a lot of it's confidential, right? And
Yeah,
or kind of, yeah, and should be, right? So
yeah. I mean, not
totally
everybody
agree.
has a chemistry PhD, right? But
Yeah,
we're OPG, New Brunswick Power, our supporters, SNC. We're trying to be Moltex itself, trying to be completely transparent about what's going on, working with the federal government, international agencies to make sure that the safeguards and the process is well understood and supported. The federal government is well aware of what we're up to, and they do understand the distinction. They have the ex-scientists to understand it. So, yeah, Moltex's vision is very much just side angels. It's trying to get in there and use the energy that's in those pellets that we already have and do it economically and safely.
right, right. Makes sense. Okay, so you're leading day-to-day operations of Moltex now. Tell us a little bit about the organization. How's it structured? I imagine you guys are trying to grow the team. Give us some perspective.
Absolutely. So yes, so I am in charge of the operations, which includes the engineering department, the projects that work with the engineering department, and the R&D department that work with the projects. We have primarily three major projects underway right now that are funded and planned out in a routine P6 schedule that everybody uses. That's the reactor development program, the parallel or companion Watts facility that you mentioned earlier that does the actual recycling, and then the implementation of a management system in VDR2, which is an optional licensing steps under design review step with the regulator to get to further get confidence in your applicability to the market that you're working within. And so those are the major projects that we have internally. You know, we're also looking at, as you mentioned earlier, figuring out how to stand up the organization, and we have several experts that we brought in to support the team. Looks something like this. There's myself. There's a chief scientist. His name's Ian Scott. He's out of the United Kingdom. He's a brilliant chemist supporting both the reactor and the Watts facility. Just a very, very smart, brilliant man. There's Rory, as you've met him. He's my boss. There's myself at the C-suite, and then there's our CFO, helps us with the economics and cash flow and how the business is run from that perspective, from the enterprise perspective. And then you've got your VPs of communication, business development. I brought in Naveed Badi, former chief nuclear engineer of S&C to be chief nuclear engineer of Moltex. So that's a big add for us. He's a brilliant man with lots of experience doing the things that we're doing. To support us, he reports to me. Again, project directors, classical sense, matrix model, company is working that way, sharing engineering and chemistry and R&D resources amongst the team based on priorities. And so that's what the organization looks like. We have very important partners that I didn't mention. IDM, who's been with us since pretty much the beginning and is an owner, Spanish firm with nuclear QA in Europe and working in Canada as well, supporting the team with several engineers and back office support. Just a giant firm that's very helpful. And then of course there's S&C, which is the pinnacle engineering firm for new designs in nuclear designs or even past nuclear designs with their IP, and just a way of doing things in Canada. And so we have a strategic relationship with them, and including having several of their high profile staff deployed right to our project. So as I mentioned, we had classical project directors. An S&C full-time employee seconded to us is in charge of one of our pinnacle projects. And rolling out the management system, we also have another S&C employee that's working on that for us. So they're part of our team. We take the one team approach that I learned from Unit 2 and from Ontario Power Generation and Bruce Power.
Yep.
And we're all wearing Moltex shirts, high-fiving, drinking from Moltex coffee mugs. We're just all on the same team. So
Love it.
that's how the company is structured.
I've seen that structure to be very effective, where you may have small number of employees, but a large number of people touching the project, and having the perspective that everyone's working together is very, very, very helpful. So
yes,
wholly support that. What are some of your guys' key objectives in the next, call it 1 to 5 years?
Okay, so this is a very complex question. I could go on for a long time. Let me just try to make it succinct for you.
Maybe we have a whole other podcast.
There's so many objectives, right? So 1 to 5 years. So our major R&D program for the Watts facility is what we're really focused on. Partnerships with labs, including Chalk River, our companion company out of the United Kingdom, the Flex Reactor from Moltex Flex Reactor, working at the chemistry department there, as well as other places around, to try to progress the design of that facility. And I think it's going quite well. But that is the key. I mean, speaking selfishly from the project's perspective, that is the key thing, that our objective that we're working on is to drive the TRL up on that. Getting ready for the VDR2 process. As I mentioned earlier, this is a voluntary but volun required step for us, and we're preparing for that.
Yeah, so VDR, voluntary design review, and that's with the Canadian Nuclear Safety, CNSC, right?
You bet. So this process, it's a pay for to play, and you need to make sure that you're ready to enter it, because you don't want to waste either yourself any time or the regulator any time. And so you got to get ready for that. And really, it's parent-child. It's a child of the preliminary. I'm doing air quotes again. The second stage in the classical approach to building out your design of anything from a car to a spaceship to a nuclear reactor, the preliminary engineering phase, and the deliverables for VDR2 sort of drop out of that phase. So that's something that we're taking very serious in planning for. We want to get that right the first time, or as close to right as possible, and be ready to be agile to transition to get it right if we found ourselves wrong, which is an important point. We need to basically put in place some learn as you go systems, and we are putting those in place. Recruitment. This is a dogfight. I don't know how else to put this to you. The industry.
People are in short supply now.
You bet.
Yeah.
You bet. So I don't know if you've got a resume ready, but I'll look at it. We are in a dogfight for talent. There's a lot of SMR vendors, We like to think our vision is a little bit different. Remember, I sort of said that at the beginning. I think that that's very important distinction for Moltex is it's not just trying to build an SMR, trying to
Yep.
change the market. And the platform to change the market, if you get that Watt science done and in the bag, is enormous. The process is completely transitionable to light water reactors, and if you think about that, that's a broad market with lots of fuel sitting safely on sites across the United States and in Europe. So it's an applicable.
Many of you guys could take fuel or spent nuclear fuel from those sites and use them, reprocess the fuel and use it as fuel in your SMR.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yep.
The
Just
concentrations
want to be clear
of
about that,
plutonium,
so in
yes.
case anyone hadn't done the research on you guys like we have.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, the concentration of plutonium in the CANDU pellets are more challenging than in the light water reactor fuel stocks for sure. So the process is
Yep.
applicable and scalable to that market. So supply chain getting ready to bring on hundreds of engineers, right? Going from
Yeah.
30 or 50 employees to hundreds of engineers and just making sure that the plans are realistic for investors and ourselves. Indigenous engagement, making sure that we have partners and that they're meaningful partners and that those partners are truly partners and being rewarded with the benefits of the projects. Moltex takes that exceptionally, important. It's extremely important to us, and our partners as well. New Brunswick Power, Ontario Power Generation, Bruce Power. The nuclear industry is the way I would describe that. SNC, all of the companies that are involved take Indigenous engagement very seriously, and Moltex is definitely prioritizing that. Our CEO and vice president of communications and stakeholders and partners management, Aaron Polka, take that very serious and are working very hard to make meaningful partnerships. Key partnerships outside of First Nations and Indigenous engagement, government, industry, academia. We're not doing this. None of the SMR companies are doing this without establishing some risk sharing with government.
Yeah.
It's a nuclear project on folks' soil, and there is quite a lot of interaction with government that's required. And there's quite a lot of partnership with government that is required, I believe, in order to progress these and help investors come on board. Industry, we need to rebuild our supply chain to execute these. If you look at Ontario Power Generation's plan, with just Ontario more generally, Bruce Power, OPG at the same time refurbishing units, they're gobbling up all of the good employees, as you can imagine. Industry needs to get ready to execute these things, and that effectively means they need to grow as well as prepare to manufacture the components for our designs, right? So
Right.
and so
Yeah,
that
I
that
think
is an
when you
important
said
point.
supply chain, right? It's not just the fuel. It's all of the components. It's the piping. It's pumps. It's the things that you don't think of that are not necessarily buy off the shelf. Yeah,
All of this stuff
that
needs to be nuclear
you'll want to build at
qualified.
scale.
Yeah, and hopefully source locally to the extent that it's possible, and then regionally, and then globally. I think local,
Sure.
regional, global, go that way. And so if you think about that, that's a lot of communication with a lot of different countries to build something as interesting as a Moltex SMR or molten salt reactor. And for our sister company here in New Brunswick, ARC, same thing. For OPG's GE Hitachi, same thing. It's going to take
Yep.
a lot of change in industry to get these things done. Academia is very important. We mentioned about the supply versus the demand, and that really means that we need to start putting more children through these programs or channeling them through these programs. I don't want to sound draconian or Orwellian, but you definitely want to make sure that the science and maths, also the trades, the building folks, like these jobs need to be prioritized for our country.
Yep.
and our economy, because it's not just nuclear that needs to get rebuilt. Canada has an infrastructure deficit. And so we're going to be importing quite a lot of talent. And what we should be doing is trying to exploit our academic institutions the best that we can, or support them to get ready for this large scale build out of Canada. And so academia is going to be essential. Partnerships, labs, postdoctorates, doctorates, masters, trades. It's very important that we get ready for this. I think that the utilities in Ontario have done a good job recognizing that. When I was at Unit 2, that's one of the things I worked on, was the shortfall in supply versus demand. And I can tell you, trades is huge. Boilermakers, craftsmen, all of these trades are in short supply based on the demand, and they're pulling them from all over. Um, and you know, the highest price wins, so to speak. So there's inflation in those rates. If you don't have enough supply, as you can imagine, the demand it's
Yep.
driving supply costs. Um, Nuclear engineers, chemists, uh, commercial managers, project managers, physicists. This is a engineers, scientists, and project managers. This is a major requirement to build all of these facilities. Even if we just build one or two of them, let alone 18 gigs in
Yep.
Ontario, and what New Brunswick is looking to build. That is there's also Saskatchewan. That is a large amount of project managers required. You really just need those expertise to get that done. Moltex
Awesome.
also
Well, Mike,
requires funding, which is very important. Right? So
yep.
establishing
Yep.
bigger and better commercial relations with folks that understand the risk, and are looking for that reward, and that support us. Both in our technology development as well as our expansion into different markets. So funding is very important. So that's the 1 to 5 years. Hopefully, some of that stuff that you could relate to. I think most of it's fairly commonplace and very important for us.
That's fantastic. So, Michael, we're coming up on our time. And I want to be respectful of your time. So, I've got just a couple more questions for you. You mentioned um, needing more commercial opportunities, and I imagine you guys want to build these things everywhere. You're starting in Ontario, and Ontario needs 18 gigs and of new nuclear, and that'd be plenty to keep you guys busy for a decent amount of time. But if somebody else, if there were other communities that wanted to bring your technology to their area, what advice would you have for community leaders and on your guys' technology versus someone else's, or
Well,
versus, we'll say, coal or other power generation options?
I'd like to say that in order for us to be serious about addressing climate change, and whether or not you believe in climate change or not, the transition from a hydrocarbon economy to electrified economy, it's going to take a lot of different things that are put in place, and one of them is obviously, and it's objectively nuclear. It's an important tool in the toolbox. The industry needs to just get on with that. At this point, we don't have the time to wait for fusion. We don't have the time to pretend that we're going to build batteries across the entire landscape. Batteries are important, wind is important, solar is very important, nuclear is very important. It's time to act. For our leaders, our regulatory processes and timelines need to match the requirement. We're trying
Yeah.
to save the world. We're channeling our entire lives, our families, to try to do this for us, for our people, and our future, our children. The regulatory processes and timelines in Canada, the United States, Europe, anywhere, they need to reflect the urgency of putting steel in the ground to get this done. We cannot wait 10, 15, or whatever the amount of time is, 7 years, to build these things. Investors don't want to wait that long for risk to disappear. The processes need to exist. The environment which we're trying to save with these designs is exceptionally important. That's why we are here. That's why I work at Moltex. We're recycling, right? We are the waste burner.
Yep.
But they can be streamlined, and not the interactions with the public in the administrative elements. If we're serious about this, which I think we are, then we need to be serious about making sure the regulatory processes support the actual projects that are getting done, and definitely weeds out the unsafe from the safe, or the economic from the uneconomic. I agree with that. I'm just saying that they need to be streamlined, or else we're gonna be in a bit of a situation. Um, and they need to prioritize the important elements of it, right? Community engagement, making sure that the designs are safe and environmentally sound for the communities that they're being positioned to be built. This is very important to us. It's very important to myself. It's important to the broader industry. It doesn't matter if you're in oil and gas or if you're in solar or wind or whatever it is. The processes just need to be a little bit more streamlined. I think, generally speaking, making sure that the leaders are clear on what it is that, I'm speaking selfishly now, what it is that Moltex is actually trying to build, and just taking some just being courageous and saying, no, there is no proliferation risk here. This is not confusing. The science is fairly straightforward. The designs that we're progressing are not meant to be a proliferation risk. As a matter of fact, they're designed specifically not to be. And just taking a stance on that, a policy position on that would be very helpful. And then just being courageous and just fighting for these projects to get built in the time in which we have, outside of the environmental regulatory processes. I mean, investing, de-risking for private investors, partnerships, these are very important things for us to be successful. It doesn't matter if it's Moltex or a different design. Most of those things click for all of them.
Yeah. Michael, I think that's a fantastic spot for us to leave it today. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me, Mark. I really enjoyed myself, and if you need me to come back to go on more and more, I'm happy to do so.